Welcome to the Straight Cutting Experience. I'm Sean Haney with RealAgriculture. At the Straight Cutting Experience, this is a podcast where we get exclusive stories from growers from across Western Canada about what's making them successful with straight cutting canola. Straight combining really seems to be taking over the prairies, really, honestly, one field at a time. And guys, as we've been hearing on this podcast, people are having success. Today's guests are Chris and Bernie Clammer. They farm in Vegreville, Alberta. And we're going to hear about their experience, what's made them successful with straight cutting canola, and try to pass on a little bit of some of the information to you, the audience. Chris and Bernie, how are you doing today?
Good, fine, thanks.
Great. Well, hey, thanks for joining us here. We're going to talk about straight cutting. Now, you guys have been dabbling in straight cutting for quite some time. Bernie, tell us a little bit about your experience. It goes back all the way to Polish varieties.
Yeah, that's right. In 1986 was a wet fall season, kind of almost like we had last the 2016 crop. So we bought a straight cut header. Back then it was just an auger header, and we straight cut probably 3/4 of our Polish variety canola starting then. And as we progressed into the Argentine varieties, we didn't do as much until recent years.
Now, Chris, you guys have been dabbling in this for a while, like your dad said, but the reality is that last year you're actually intending this year to 100% of your acres. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. In the 2016 harvest, we straight cut 100% of our acres as well.
Wow. And so, like with some people, I'm finding that they're planning for a percentage of their acres, and they're still swathing some. How come you made the decision, Chris, to go 100% all in?
The equipment that we purchased to straight cut our canola, the ease of harvest, the lack of a second operation of swathing, even the seed size, and a variability of timing to swath. In past years, there's been huge differences in crops. 2015 became an issue to swath. There's 4 or 5 different stages of canola in the field, and when do you swath it?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned varieties. Bernie, for you, does it not just start right off the hop when you're going to decide if you're going to straight cut or not? It really starts with variety selection?
Yeah, and that's a key point. Going back a few years ago, the variety choices were limited to straight cutting varieties. And the availability of good quality straight cutting varieties has improved greatly in our minds. And it just makes harvesting the standability and the quality of seed has improved drastically. That's making straight cutting more convenient, as Chris referred to.
Right. But, so, Bernie, what are some of the characteristics of those varieties? Because there's a lot of seed companies out there that are, obviously marketing their varieties as straight cut ready or capable, or, hey, this is the perfect variety for straight cutting. So in your mind, what are the characteristics of a good straight cut variety?
Well, you want a variety that has creates a real good, solid, strong canopy, but yet you want a bit of a lean to your canopy. You don't want a variety that lodges, and you don't want a variety that stands too erect and is vulnerable to wind. So it's a bit of a challenge. Sometimes just environmental conditions can change what the variety will produce, but base varieties, a good knit, tight canopy that has a bit of a lean-to is what we strive to achieve.
And obviously, after we got our hybrids selected, we work on that fertilization plan. Chris, what are some of the things that go into the fertility plan when you are intending to straight cut canola?
We've gone to a variable rate across the farm. Variable rate in our canola for our fertility package has helped with evening out how that crop ripens and matures, and to get a more even, consistent stand across the field.
Really cool. Hey, Bernie, any more to follow up on terms of fertility and from your standpoint?
Well, no, Chris pretty well summarized it. The variable rate prescription, you on the better land, you can maximize your input of nitrogen and still maintain the equalized maturity versus the poorer zones in the field. The phosphorus inputs, we not only vary our nitrogen input, but we vary our blend input, which again allows that inconsistent soil type to become more consistent crop growth equalization across all different zones in our prescription areas.
Okay, and so Chris, when you get to the InCrop stage, managing that crop while it's growing, what are the things you have to do during the season to enhance your success?
Well, our 2016 season with our wet growing season, fungicide options were a beneficial necessity to keep the stand. Any crop with disease in it has a vulnerability to shatter, to break off. It's been a challenge, especially in the 2016 season, and we've noticed a huge benefit in using those applications.
Okay, what about desiccation? Are you desiccating before you harvest?
We will desiccate all of our standing canola acres.
Okay.
The harvestability, productivity of the combine, the dry down of the plant, a more even, uniform field to harvest, and better straw residue management with the plants being dried down and the chopper doing a better job for your next year's inputs.
Okay, so Bernie, what about equipment? So we've got the crop all the way through, but equipment plays a huge part here in making sure you have straight cutting canola success as well.
Yeah, in the past, we actually used draper type headers, and we found reasonable success with those. But depending again on the variety that was chosen and the lean that it may have to a crop, a draper type header has potential to have ahead of the knife losses or at the knife losses versus what we use now as a vario header with an extendable table. So your reel is actually behind your knife tip, and your reel has the capability of less shattering that ends up on the ground versus ends up in the extended table. And also the feedability when you run a 40-foot head, an auger type vario header feeds the combine substantially better, more evenly and more consistent than a canvas draper header. We found that in the 40-foot widths that the center drum would be our limiting factor in combine productivity or performance because, as you know, some of these straight cut canola varieties, when your yields get substantial and your canopy gets substantial, there's a lot of material put through that center drum, and the vario auger headers just manage that much better.
Yeah, Chris, what do you find with combine speed or your harvest speed when you're straight cutting?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is your consistency into the combine. The efficiency of the combine is smoother. You never have a pile to deal with. The dry ears, the standing material maintains its moisture a little bit better. We haven't run into our extremely dry canola coming off at the 5 and 6% moistures. It's easier to keep your moisture level up to where you want it in the crop. It doesn't dry down as quick.
Yeah. So do you find that you have to combine later than you typically would?
Yeah, basically if you use a good pre-harvest burn down product that actually dries the plant down, it doesn't matter what chemistry of canola. As Chris stated, a pre-harvest is a huge benefit. Once your pre-harvest starts to work and take it into effect, you may be a few days after the possibility of picking up a swath canola. But huge benefits come into, and we'll use 2016 as an example. When you have adverse weather conditions, your straight cutting canola isn't at the mercy of a rainfall or, in fact, snowfall as such that a swath canola is. So there is drawbacks in both scenarios for timing, but typically your straight cutting canola will end up in a bin just a few days later than a swath canola. But if you run into adverse weather conditions, your standing canola ends up in a bin way quicker than a swath canola would.
So the last stage here is something that people don't think about a lot, is storage. Chris, what do you have to think about in terms of storage when you've harvested that straight cut crop?
With storage, there is always the concern for possibility of tougher material in low spots or inconsistency in the land. To put an aeration fan on the bin and cool it to a reasonable temperature and maintain your harvested product in a storage facility to not allow any heating or high moisture areas in that bin. It'll increase the longevity of that stored canola.
So, Bernie, when you look at that harvest sample and you're putting it into storage, what are you seeing in terms of something like green seed count? What are some of the impacts?
Well, green seed count, in our experience, has been very, very minimal. The biggest thing, and Chris touched on it, is you may have a bit of variable in your moisture content of the seed, but for lack of a better term, your straight cutting canola seed probably isn't cured per se as a swath canola seed is. And until that straight cut canola seed is gone through its, again, lack of a better term, curing process, monitoring those bins with aeration. And we also have remote sensing cables, temperature and moisture cables in all our bins. And it just helps put a peace of mind to storing that canola safely and, as Chris said, for longer terms. And we especially, if we have, again, dealing with last fall canola, the tougher seed that we actually froze in the wintertime and have nicely dried it down with these last several days of warm weather that we're enjoying here this spring. So your seed, I guess, has some life in it when it's straight cut versus a swath seed, and that life has to be slowly addressed, and observation of that canola is important.
Yes, Chris, there's a lot of people out there that have, as they've moved their farms to more straight cut canola acres, I've had different anecdotes from people saying, oh, my dad thought I was crazy. I had to sort of convince him, or, it took a while, and it took, a couple of years for him to see that actually it can work. It seems like your dad was all in on straight cutting early. Yeah,
it's been something we've done ever since I was young, and the fact that it's one less operation, it saves us some time and some hours on equipment. The fact that the standability and the crop now with today's varieties have increased in pod shatter and standability and pod drop. It's something that is beneficial on our farm.
Okay, guys. So there's probably some listeners out there. Before we wrap up, I gotta ask you the question, because there's some listeners out there that are probably saying, "Okay, I'm thinking about it. You guys are kind of got me half convinced I should think about trying this." What sort of advice do you give some first timers out there in terms of thinking about straight cutting canola this year? What's sort of a tip you can give them, Bernie?
I guess the biggest thing is think of the whole picture, as we covered in the 5 segments of planting through this storage and variety choice. If you're have some reluctancy, take a quarter or a third of your acres, pick your best fields, experience for yourself. You'll find that typically a straight cut canola will probably yield about 5 to 7% greater yields. And as we talked about, pay attention to your fungicide use, and you'll be pleasantly surprised that it pans out fairly well. But slow into it, I guess. If you're reluctant, there's several of our neighbors within a half an hour radius of our place have been straight cutting for several years as well, and it's definitely catching on.
Give yourself a chance to succeed. I love it. Okay, Chris, how about you?
I agree with my dad's comment. It's try it out. Don't be scared of it. It's a beneficial practice. It saves yourself some time. Even the fact the seeds seem to be a little larger, and it's a little easier to harvest. A little less finicky on how to set the combine, and a little more consistent across the field. It goes back to the harvestability and the performance of the combines and the yield at the end of the day.
Well, Bernie and Chris, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us, Chris and Bernie. It's great to chat with you. It's great to hear people having success with straight cutting canola. And I hope you learned a lot here today on the straight cutting experience. I want to make sure you visit agsolutions.ca/straightcutpod for more information. And don't forget to follow BSF on Twitter at BSF Ag Solutions. I'm Sean Haney with Real Agriculture. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Straight Cutting Experience.